Imagine an HOA telling you exactly what shade of beige to paint your life, only for you to legally respond by parking a World War II tank on the front lawn. That is exactly what happened when power-hungry boards messed with the wrong geniuses. From a man who turned his fence into a terrifying mural to a veteran who blinded his neighbors with freedom floodlights, these are 49 times homeowners used the law to deliver the ultimate petty revenge. Hit that subscribe button right now because you are about to witness the most satisfying malicious compliance in history. 1. An old retired uncle named Bob moved into a fancy neighborhood with a strict homeowners association that banned all types of TV antennas on roofs. The board members laughed when Bob asked permission to install a small radio wire. They told him to read the rulebook and denied his request immediately. But Bob was a certified amateur radio operator who knew about a powerful federal law called the PRB-1 ruling. This law says local rules cannot stop amateur radio communications, so Bob maliciously complied. Instead of a small wire, he hired a construction crew. They built a massive 60-foot steel tower in his backyard that looked like a space station. The HOA was furious, but legal experts told them they could not touch it. 2. A young creative homeowner received a threatening letter from his neighborhood board regarding his wooden fence. They demanded he repaint the entire structure using only their approved shade called desert sand. This boring beige color was the only option allowed in the community guidelines. The man decided to follow their rules exactly while destroying their property values. He hired a talented professional artist to paint a terrifying mural on the fence. The scene depicted a post-apocalyptic wasteland filled with scary mutants and destruction. However, the genius part was that the artist only used different shading techniques of the specific desert sand hex code. Technically, the fence was one single color. The board members were horrified, but the city attorney confirmed it was legal. 3. A middle-aged man simply wanted some privacy in his backyard, but the local zoning board told him that building a fence taller than 4 feet was illegal. He stared at the short fence and realized his nosy neighbors could see everything he was doing. He read the city code 10 times and discovered a massive loophole regarding storage. The law banned tall fences but said nothing about parking recreational vehicles. So he went to a junkyard and bought 3 broken-down pontoon boats. He parked them in a giant U shape around his patio, creating a massive wall of rusted aluminum. The neighbors complained about the view, but the city could do nothing because technically he was just storing his boats. 4. A strict condo association in Florida prided itself on a zero-tolerance policy regarding pets of any kind. A new resident moved in and terrified the old ladies in the lobby by walking a 5-foot live alligator on a leash. The board immediately tried to evict him for violating the animal rules. However, the man calmly presented a signed letter from a licensed psychiatrist. The note classified the dangerous reptile as a necessary emotional support animal that helped ground the man during panic attacks. Under federal housing laws, the condo had to allow the creature. Now the residents check the elevator carefully because the service gator likes to sunbathe near the pool. 5. A hard-working plumber was told by his snooty HOA that commercial vehicles with logos were not allowed in driveways overnight. He needed his van for early morning emergencies, but the board threatened to tow it away. Instead of parking blocks away, he came up with a brilliant disguise. He ordered custom-made magnetic sheets that were the exact size of his van panels. These magnets were painted to look like the side of a generic white mom van complete with fake door handles. Every evening when he gets home, he slaps the magnets over his business logos. The van instantly transforms into a family vehicle, and the patrol guard has no idea it is actually a work truck. 6. An eccentric architect wanted to build a cabin in the woods, but the local planning commission denied his permit. They claimed his modern design was too intrusive and would ruin the natural beauty of the forest landscape. The man was furious, so he redesigned the exterior with a malicious twist. He covered the entire outside of the small house with high-quality mirrors. The result was an invisible building that perfectly reflected the trees and sky around it. It is now the most camouflaged structure in the state. Hikers often walk right into it because they cannot see it. The board granted the permit because they technically could not prove it was visually intrusive anymore. 7. A nice couple living in a wealthy, gated community was constantly bullied by their rich, snobby neighbors. They decided to investigate the neighborhood records and found a shocking mistake. The HOA had forgotten to pay property taxes on the common areas for decades. The city put the actual pavement of the cul-de-sac up for auction. The couple bought the street in front of everyone's house for a few $1,000s. The next day they sent letters to the rude neighbors informing them of a new fee. If the rich residents wanted to park in front of their own mansions, they now had to pay the couple rent. The HOA had to buy the street back for a fortune. 8. A grandmother loved drying her laundry in the fresh air, but her neighborhood association banned clotheslines as unsightly trash. They sent her a fine every time she hung out her quilts. She researched state laws and found that many states protect green energy devices. She reinstalled her clothesline and sent a formal letter to the board. She declared that it was not a clothesline, but a solar-powered fabric dehydration device. Under the State Solar Rights Act, the HOA was legally prohibited from banning energy-saving equipment. The board members were furious that they could not stop her. Now her giant underwear waves in the wind as a symbol of green energy freedom. 9. A suburban dad ran out of space in his garage and started building a small wooden shed in his front yard. The city inspector stopped by and slapped a red tag on the structure saying front yard sheds were illegal. The man thought for a moment and realized public amenities were exempt from this specific zoning rule. He finished the shed and installed a single shelf filled with old paperbacks on the side. He painted a sign that said community library and invited the neighbors to take a book. The inspector returned but had to walk away. The structure was no longer a shed. It was now a public educational resource, and the city could not tear it down. 10. A wealthy family in California finished building a massive swimming pool just as a severe drought hit the state. The city issued a strict ban prohibiting anyone from filling new pools with water. The family looked at the empty concrete hole and refused to let it stay dry. They filled it up and immediately dumped in a bucket of live koi fish and some lily pads. When the water police arrived to issue a massive fine, the owner stopped them. He explained that this was not a swimming pool anymore. It was a stock pond for livestock, which was exempt from drought restrictions. The family now swims with the fish while the neighbors stare at their dry lawns. 11. A tech-savvy homeowner got into a massive fight with his board regarding a small satellite dish on his roof. The HOA demanded he hide the ugly device immediately or face daily fines. The man did some research and discovered the federal OTARD rule from the FCC. This law states that homeowners must be allowed to place antennas where the signal is strongest. So the man moved the dish from his roof to a 10-foot pole in the front yard. He aimed the dish directly at the HOA president's bedroom window, claiming it was the only spot with a clear signal. The board could do absolutely nothing, while the president stared at the metal dish every single morning. 12. A grumpy dad received a citation from the city ordinance officer stating his lawn was too long. The local law required all grass to be shorter than 4 inches to maintain property values. The man was furious at the intrusion, so he decided to follow the law with malicious precision. He got out his mower and cut the grass to exactly 3 inches high. However, he mowed the rest of the lawn down to the dirt, creating a massive contrast. The pattern he mowed spelled out the words, "Screw you" in giant block letters. The message was perfectly legal under the height limit and was so large that it was actually visible on Google Earth satellite images. 13. A resourceful mechanic needed a place to store his tools, but the city required expensive permits for permanent structures. He refused to pay the fees, so he came up with a mobile solution. He built a beautiful wooden shed on top of a heavy-duty trailer chassis with wheels. Every time the building inspector drives by to issue a citation, the mechanic walks outside, He hitches the shed to his pickup truck and moves it exactly 2 feet to the left. He explains that since it has wheels, it is technically vehicle cargo and not a building. The inspector screams in frustration, but the law is clear that parked trailers are allowed in the driveway. 14. The City Planning Committee decided they wanted to seize a strip of private land to widen a busy road. The owner refused to sell his property, but the government threatened to use eminent domain to take it by force. The man panicked and researched environmental protection laws. He went to the store and bought several large bat houses. He installed them on the trees in the path of the proposed road. Within weeks, a colony of endangered bats moved into the new homes. It became a federally protected habitat, and the city was legally banned from bulldozing the area. The road expansion was canceled immediately because disturbing the bats would be a federal crime. 15. A wealthy history buff moved into a fancy neighborhood that had a very specific rule banning commercial trucks. The HOA did not want working-class vehicles parked on the pristine streets. The man looked at the rule book and noticed it did not say anything about military vehicles. He went to an auction and purchased a fully functional World War II tank. He parked the massive armored machine right on the curb in front of his house. The HOA board lost their minds, but the man provided the registration. It was classified as a historic military collectible and not a commercial truck. Now the neighbors drive their luxury cars very carefully around the giant cannon facing the street. 16. A creative mother was furious when the city fined her daughter for drawing hopscotch lines with chalk. The local ordinance strictly prohibited defacing public property with graffiti of any kind. The mom decided to protest by renting a high-powered industrial pressure washer. She went to the dirtiest section of the city sidewalk downtown. She used the powerful water jet to blast away the grime and dirt. However, she only cleaned specific areas to form letters. She wrote massive, insulting words on the ground by cleaning the concrete. The police arrived, but could not arrest her. She was not defacing property, she was cleaning it. The city had to wash the whole street to erase her message. 17. A struggling restaurant owner in the South was losing money because of a local blue law. The county banned the sale of alcohol on Sundays, which was the biggest football day of the week. The owner realized that religious organizations were exempt from this specific rule. He filled out the paperwork and officially registered his barbecue joint as a religious center. On Sundays, he opens the doors for service. The beer is now served as Holy Communion, and the ribs are considered sacraments. The local sheriff tried to shut him down, but the judge ruled it was a legitimate religious gathering. The Church of BBQ is now packed with hungry worshipers every single Sunday. 18. A grumpy convenience store owner was tired of teenagers loitering in his parking lot every night. The police refused to remove them because they were not technically breaking any laws. The owner discovered a device called the mosquito, which was used in England. This speaker plays a high-frequency buzzing sound that is incredibly annoying. The trick is that only people under 25 years old have the hearing sensitivity to hear it. He installed it, and the teens immediately fled the parking lot, holding their ears. When the older police officers arrived to investigate the complaints, they stood right next to the screaming device and heard absolutely nothing. The kids never came back. 19. A man living on a rural highway spent every winter rebuilding his mailbox. The local snowplow driver drove recklessly and smashed the plastic box off its post every time it snowed. The man complained to the county, but they ignored him. So he built a new mailbox that looked standard on the outside. However, the inside was filled with reinforced concrete and a solid steel rail driven 6 feet into the ground. The next time it snowed, the plow came flying down the road and tried to bash the mailbox. The plow hit the solid concrete and the truck was instantly totaled. The county tried to sue him, but his mailbox was on his own private land. 20. A privacy-obsessed homeowner wanted to build a high wall around his property to block out the neighbors. The zoning board told him that fences were limited to a maximum height of 6 feet. He realized that nature has different rules than construction. He went to a nursery and bought a fast-growing species called clumping bamboo. He planted it along the entire perimeter of his yard. Within a year, the bamboo grew into a dense, solid wall that was 20 feet high. The neighbors complained that it felt like a prison wall. The city inspector arrived but shrugged his shoulders. It was technically just tall grass and not a structure, so the height limit did not apply. 21. A homeowner in a sunny state wanted to save money on electricity, so he applied to install solar panels. The HOA board denied the request, immediately claiming the panels were ugly and ruined the aesthetic of the neighborhood. The man smiled because he knew about the Solar Rights Act, which prohibits HOAs from blocking renewable energy. He installed the panels anyway, but then he took it a step further. He sued the HOA for the lost energy savings during the month they delayed him. The judge ruled in his favor, and the association had to pay him for the sunlight he missed. The board members learned that green energy is more powerful than their aesthetic preferences. 22. A suburban dad was furious after receiving a $50 fine for leaving his trash can out too long. He felt the rule was ridiculous and wanted to send a message to the management. He went to the bank and withdrew exactly $50 in loose pennies. That is 5,000 copper coins in a heavy bag. He walked into the HOA office and dumped the mountain of change onto the pristine counter. The clerk refused to accept it, but the man pointed out the federal law. Pennies are legal tender for all debts, public and private. They were legally required to accept his payment. He stood there smiling as the annoyed staff spent hours counting every single penny year. 23. An outdoor enthusiast wanted to build a nice wooden deck for grilling in his backyard. The local zoning authority told him that no new structures were allowed to touch the ground in that protected area. The man looked at the massive oak trees in his yard and had a brilliant idea. He hired an engineer to design a floating platform suspended by high-tension cables. The heavy deck hovered 3 feet above the forest floor, without a single post touching the soil. The inspector arrived and looked underneath the structure in total confusion. Since it had zero ground contact, it was not technically a ground structure. The man now enjoys his barbecue while floating in mid-air. 24. A lazy homeowner hated mowing his large lawn, but the city kept fining him for the noise violations. The local ordinance prohibited operating heavy machinery like gas lawnmowers on Sunday mornings. The man wanted to sleep in, but his grass was getting too long. He decided to rent a creative solution from a local farm. A truck arrived and dropped off a herd of hungry goats. The animals ate the grass quickly and silently. The neighbors called the police to complain about the farm animals. The man explained that goats are livestock and not heavy machinery. The noise ordinance did not apply to eating. The city had to drop the fine while the goats finished their breakfast. 25. A young goth couple moved into a conservative neighborhood and parked their daily driver in the driveway. It happened to be a vintage black hearse used for funerals. The HOA board freaked out and tried to tow it, claiming it was a commercial work vehicle. The couple was prepared for this discrimination. They showed the board the official vehicle registration from the state DMV. The hearse was not registered for commercial use at all. It was legally classified as a luxury station wagon. The board members were horrified, but they could not ban a station wagon without banning everyone else. Now the creepy car stays parked right out front for all the neighbors to admire daily. 26. A nature lover was devastated when the city ordered him to cut down a beautiful old oak tree on his property. They claimed the tree was dying and posed a safety hazard to the sidewalk. The man reluctantly cut the branches but left a massive 12-foot stump standing. The city demanded he remove the stump, but he had a better plan. He hired a famous chainsaw artist to carve the wood. The artist turned the stump into a giant hand extending a middle finger towards City Hall. The city tried to fine him, but the court ruled it was now a piece of folk art. It was protected free speech and the city could not censor art. 27. A small business owner was struggling to get customers because the city banned all sandwich board signs on the sidewalk. The law stated that obstacles could not be placed on public walkways. The owner thought about the Constitution and found a loophole. He hired a college student to stand on the corner, wearing the sandwich board over his shoulders. The police arrived to issue a ticket, but the owner stopped them. He explained that you can ban a sign, but you cannot ban a human being from standing on a public sidewalk. It was a constitutional right to assemble. The student stood there all day, waving at the angry officers who could do absolutely nothing. 28. A petty neighbor complained that a homeowner's landscape lights were too bright and violated the decorative lighting rules. The HOA sent a letter demanding the removal of the Pleasant Garden lights immediately. The homeowner was furious, so he decided to comply maliciously. He removed the pretty lights and replaced them with industrial-grade motion activated security floodlights. He aimed them directly at the complaining neighbor's house. When the HOA tried to object, he cited the safety bylaws. Security lighting was exempt from aesthetic rules for safety reasons. Now, every time a squirrel runs across the lawn, the neighbor's house is blasted with 5,000 lumens of blinding white light. 29. A man living on a busy corner wanted a place to sit and watch the traffic. The city zoning department denied his permit for a concrete patio, claiming it was too close to the road. The man went to an auction and bought an official city bus stop bench. He bolted it to a concrete slab right next to the street. The city workers saw the bench and assumed it was new public infrastructure. They started mowing around it and even emptying the trash can he placed next to it. The man now has a private patio that is maintained by the taxpayers. He sits there every morning waving at the buses that do not stop 30. A homeowner received a notice that the county planned to widen the road and pave over half of his front lawn. He begged them to stop, but the government refused to listen. He knew that disturbing a grave site required a massive legal battle and a court order, so he held a funeral in his front yard. He buried an urn containing the ashes of his beloved pet hamster. He erected a small stone monument that marked the grave clearly. When the bulldozers arrived, he informed them it was a burial ground. The construction crew had to stop immediately. The legal hassle was so expensive that the county decided to narrow the road instead of moving the hamster. 31. A proud military veteran was shocked when his homeowners association ordered him to remove his flagpole. They claimed it was an unapproved structure that violated the neighborhood aesthetic guidelines. The veteran knew his rights and cited the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, which overrides HOA rules. The board backed down, but complained about the pole. To ensure he was following the flag code perfectly, he added the required illumination for nighttime display. He installed a stadium-grade floodlight aimed directly at the flag. However, the light also happened to shine straight into the complaining neighbor's bedroom window. It was legal compliance that kept the neighbor awake all night long. 32. A quiet man lived next to a nightmare neighbor who constantly complained that the wooden fence was crossing the property line. The neighbor demanded the fence be moved immediately or he would sue. The man hired a surveyor and discovered the fence was actually on the line. He decided to move it exactly 1 inch inside his own property boundary. This gave him full control over the structure. He painted the side facing his house a nice neutral color. But on the side facing the rude neighbor, he painted it bright neon pink with giant polka dots. Since it was on his land, the neighbor had to stare at the ugly wall forever. 33. A car enthusiast wanted to protect his vintage Toyota from the sun, but he did not have a garage. The city zoning laws strictly banned metal carports in driveways because they looked cheap. The man read the code carefully and noticed a specific exception for temporary event structures. He went to the store and bought a fancy white wedding tent. He set it up over his car and claimed he was hosting a party. The neighbors waited for the wedding, but it never started. He has been renewing the temporary party permit for 6 years now. The city cannot stop him because technically he is just hosting a really long celebration for his Toyota. 34. An intrusive city inspector kept entering a private backyard without permission to measure the lawn height. The homeowner asked him to stop trespassing, but the official claimed he had the right to inspect the property. The owner decided to take up a dangerous new hobby to secure his land. He bought several boxes of angry honeybees and became a registered beekeeper. He placed the hives directly against the back of the gate latch. The next time the inspector reached over the fence to open the latch, he heard a loud buzzing sound. He ran away screaming and never returned. The bees successfully defended the property when the lock could not do the job. 35. A truck owner was tired of getting tickets for parking on the street for more than 24 hours. The local ordinance was designed to stop people from abandoning old cars. The man read the fine print and found an exemption for vehicles that were actively being sold. He grabbed a piece of cardboard and wrote a for sale sign. He placed it in the window with a price tag of $1 million. The police tried to ticket him again, but he pointed to the sign. It was legally for sale, so the time limit did not apply. The truck sat there for 3 years because nobody wanted to pay the price. 36. A frustrated cyclist was tired of dodging massive potholes that the city refused to fix. The road department ignored his complaints for months, saying they had no budget for repairs. The man decided to force their hand by using a can of spray paint. He went out at night and drew crude, anatomical pictures of male body parts around every single pothole. The next morning, the city officials were horrified by the obscene graffiti all over the street. They sent a crew out immediately to cover the drawings. To cover the art, they had to fill the potholes with fresh asphalt. The road was perfectly smooth within 24 hours. 37. A group of innocent children set up a lemonade stand on a hot summer day to make some pocket money. A grumpy neighbor called the police because the kids did not have a business permit. The officer had to shut down the stand because selling goods required a license. The kids were sad, but their clever father had an idea. They changed the sign from 50 cents to free lemonade. Below that, they added a small jar that said tips appreciated. Since they were giving the drink away, it was no longer a business. The police could not regulate a gift. The kids made even more money from generous tippers that day. 38. An entire neighborhood association voted to ban cell phone towers because they believed radio waves were harmful. One homeowner hated the HOA board and wanted to make some extra cash. He contacted a major telecom company and offered to lease a 10 by 10 spot in his backyard. The company agreed and installed a massive 5G transmission tower right next to the pool. The HOA sued immediately but lost the case instantly. Federal infrastructure laws override all local zoning rules regarding telecommunications. The neighbors now have excellent cell service, but they have to look at the giant metal tower every time they go outside. 39. A rural landowner had a deep drainage ditch separating his house from the main road. He asked the county for permission to build a concrete bridge, but they denied his permit due to flood risks. The man refused to give up and found a loophole regarding vehicles. He bought an old rusted flatbed train car from a scrapyard. He used a crane to lay the massive steel platform across the ditch. The county inspector arrived to issue a fine, but the man explained it was not a bridge. It was simply a registered vehicle parked horizontally. Since it was not a permanent structure, he was allowed to drive over it every day. 40. A young couple decided to stop mowing their lawn to help the local ecosystem. The city code enforcement officer slapped them with a huge fine for having overgrown weeds. The couple did not cut the grass, but instead applied for a special certification. They registered their yard as an official way station for monarch butterflies. These insects are a federally protected species that need tall plants to survive. The couple showed the certificate to the judge. If the city forced them to mow the habitat, it would be a federal crime against nature. The city had to drop the fine, and the yard is now a permanent jungle of tall weeds. 41. An artistic homeowner lived in a beige neighborhood where the HOA rules were incredibly boring. The bylaws stated that all window drapes visible from the street had to be pure white. The homeowner hated this rule because she loved vibrant colors. She bought the brightest neon tie-dye fabric she could find. It looked like a psychedelic explosion. Then she sewed a plain white sheet to the back of the curtains. From the street, the inspector only saw compliant white fabric, but inside the house looked like a rave. The HOA was suspicious, but they could never prove she was breaking the rules because they were not allowed inside. She beat them with a simple lining. 42. A wealthy man wanted to expand his luxury home, but the local zoning laws limited buildings to 2 stories. He was furious because he needed more space for his parties. He read the code and realized the height restriction only applied to upward construction. He hired a massive excavator and dug a huge hole in the backyard. He built an entire luxury floor underground, complete with a sunken courtyard. The neighbors looked over the fence and saw nothing but a hole. The city tried to stop him, but the law said nothing about depth. He now has a 3-story house, but only 2 are visible. It was a loophole that cost millions to exploit. 43. A family wanted fresh eggs, but their suburban town strictly prohibited raising farm animals like chickens. The ordinance was designed to keep the area quiet and clean. The father found a loophole used by 4-H clubs. He registered his hens not as livestock, but as exotic showbirds. To make it official, he enters them in one county fair every single year. The rest of the year, they live in the backyard. When the animal control officer came to take them away, the dad showed the registration papers. These were performance artists and not farm animals. The officer had to leave while the chickens clucked in victory. The family enjoys fresh omelets every morning. 44. A contractor was tired of parking his heavy Ford truck on the street where it got scratched. He wanted to pave his front lawn for parking, but the city denied the permit. They said front yard parking pads were illegal. The man applied for a permit to build a concrete wheelchair ramp for accessibility. The city approved it immediately because denying it would be discrimination. The man poured a massive concrete ramp that just happened to be the exact width and length of his pickup truck. He now parks his truck on the ramp every night. He claims it is just there to test the slope. The city knows he tricked them but can do nothing. 45. An HOA board in a historic district demanded that a new owner paint his Victorian home a clean white. The owner hated the modern look and wanted to restore the house to its original glory. He dug through the town archives and found the original paint codes from the 1890s. The colors were a hideous mix of dark purple and swamp green. He applied for historical restoration status, which overrides HOA rules. He painted the house the ugly original colors. The board members were horrified by the eyesore. They begged him to paint it white, but he refused. He claimed he was just preserving history. The house is now the ugliest landmark in town. 46. A clever millionaire bought a massive mansion with a huge front lawn in a high-tax area. He was tired of paying $50,000 a year in property taxes. He discovered that agricultural land was taxed at a much lower rate. He went to a livestock auction and bought 3 confused cows. He placed them on his manicured front lawn and leased the grass to a local rancher. The state assessor had to reclassify his luxury estate as a working farm. His tax bill dropped to almost nothing. The neighbors hate the smell of manure, but the millionaire loves saving money. He literally watches his grass turn into cash while the cows eat his landscaping. 47. A family loved Christmas lights, but their strict HOA required decorations to be taken down within 30 days of a holiday. They hated climbing the ladder in the freezing cold. The dad came up with a lazy genius plan. He installed permanent color-changing bulbs along the roofline. When January came, he turned them red for Valentine's Day. In March, he turned them green for St. Patrick's Day. The lights never came down. The HOA tried to fine him, but he argued they were holiday-specific decorations. He was technically compliant with the 30-day rule for every single holiday. Now his house glows all year round, and he never has to climb that ladder again. 48. An eccentric gardener loved garden gnomes, but his community rules limited all lawn ornaments to 24 inches in height. The board wanted to prevent tacky decorations. The man found a massive 12-foot-tall statue of a gnome at a roadside attraction. He brought it home and rented a backhoe. He dug a deep hole and buried the giant statue up to its waist. Only the top 23 inches of the hat were visible above the grass. The board tried to fine him, but he measured it in front of them. It was under the height limit. The giant gnome watches the neighborhood from underground, waiting for the day it can rise again. 49. A man made some bad choices and lost his driver's license after a DUI charge. He still needed to get to the liquor store, but he could not drive a car. He went to a toy store and bought a motorized Barbie Jeep intended for toddlers. It ran on a small battery and moved at 5 miles per hour. He squeezed his adult body into the pink plastic toy and drove it on the sidewalk. The police pulled him over but realized they could not arrest him. It was a toy and not a motor vehicle. He legally drives his pink Jeep to the store every week, while the cops just shake their heads in disbelief. Well, there you have it. Proof that with enough spite, a law degree, and a petty attitude, you can absolutely ruin any HOA president's day. If watching these power-hungry boards get legally destroyed made you smile, smash that like button and subscribe to BrainFumble for more chaotic genius. Don't forget to ring the notification bell, or we might just send the service gator to your front door. Now I have to know, which one of these was the ultimate power move? Would you rather park a WWII tank in your driveway or paint your fence neon pink? Let me know in the comments below.